And I'm going to ask David Hall to have an opening prayer. David is with the Associated Conservatives of Texas. He's the gentleman that's brought the Liberty Bell, and so we're going to ask him to open our ceremonies this morning with a word of prayer. Let us bow our heads.
Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for this beautiful day in which to assemble. We thank you for all the wonderful blessings that you have provided for us in this life. And Lord, we don't know each other. We've come here from all across this nation, and we've all been struck so strong that it has caused us to come here this morning. And Lord, I pray first that you will bring us into unity, help us to greet one another, and to know our fellow brothers and sisters. Help us, Lord, today to be unified in our focus. Help us, Lord, to be good examples. Help us to be good candles lit brightly upon a hill that a world will see what occurred here. Let us stand for righteousness as you give us the strength to see it. And each one of us have different talents, Lord. And I pray, Lord, that you, by your Holy Spirit, will quicken those talents within us, that a word will be got out about your greatness, that you have not been conquered, but, Lord, but that there are great things to be done. And, Lord, I pray that everything that is said and done here this day will glorify you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
This is the 5th annual memorial. Actually, it's the 6th memorial that's been held. They had one while I was still in jail in 93. I think it was around June or July. But this is the 5th annual memorial held either on or as close to April 19th as possible. This year, there are some of the survivors that couldn't make it for various reasons. Those of you that have attended in the past will recognize some of the names. David Thibodeau, who was one of the fire survivors, is not going to be able to be here today. His wife's father died and they had a funeral yesterday, so he couldn't make it. Some of the people that usually come on a regular basis, year after year, also are not going to be able to make it, and we're sure going to miss them. I could mention their names, but just let it be known that they are thinking of us today. They just couldn't be here for one reason or another. We had also asked several people to speak, and they declined, not because they didn't want to be here, but other commitments prevented it. One of the people that we invited, or one of two people that we invited, was a husband and wife team from Virginia. They have a program called Parents Against Corruption and Cover-Up. Tom Burkett and Beth George, they're both school teachers, and because of the school schedule, they couldn't make it today, but they sent a statement, and we want to announce what they're about, what they're into, and that is, last year they put on a quilt display in Washington, D.C. in memory of all those that have either been killed by government agents or law enforcement, or who have died mysteriously, and somehow either the courts or law enforcement have not been all that anxious to reveal the truth of the situation. Beth George's son, Tommy, was murdered, and a friend of his was murdered, and so they began to try to investigate, because they were being told he committed suicide. And in the process of trying to get to the bottom of it, they ran into many, many people that had the same kind of experience. Last year they invited a number of the survivors to contribute quilt squares to their display, and we did. Quite a number from Waco here did. Survivors in other parts of the country sent in quilt squares. And they're about to have another, it'll be their second annual Cover-Up Quilt Day Memorial. It'll be in May, May 24th, 23rd, excuse me, in Washington, D.C. I have been invited to be a speaker at that event, and I have agreed. And also, I understand Randy Weaver will also be there. So if any of you can make it to the Washington, D.C. area next month, please do so to support their demonstration and their display of these various quilts. I think they have well over 100 different quilt squares now for people from all different walks of life and different circumstances, but each one has some mystery or some problems with the events surrounding their death, and each family is concerned with getting the truth out about what they believe really happened as opposed to what the media or whatever has reported. So they couldn't be here today. We also, and those of you that come into the museum afterwards will see on the bulletin board a little brochure like this advertising a new documentary video. It's put out by Jeremiah Films. They did a lot of the filming back in January. They came down here, interviewed people, and so forth. Jeremiah Films are the same people that did the Clinton Chronicles and quite a few other documentaries that some of you may be familiar with. I had asked the producer of that show to be a speaker here today, and he would dearly have loved to have been here. He wanted to be here, but Jeremiah Films would not allow him to speak for some reason. They said it's against their policy. So he will not be here, but he wanted to be with us in spirit at least. Later on you can get one of these. This video is not out yet, but they're offering a discount if you order it with this little brochure, with this little coupon, and you can pick them up inside and after this service. I'm privileged to have Ron Engelman here today. He has agreed to be our Master of Ceremonies. Ron Engelman was a radio talk show host during the 51-day siege. He got personally involved with what was going on, and he was very outspoken. Those of us that were on the inside listening to the radio, especially when they cut off the electricity, we only listened to two things on the radio to conserve batteries. We listened to Ron Engelman's show, and of course we listened to the morning briefing to see how different they were and how far from the truth some of the official versions of what was going on each day was. So let me introduce Ron Engelman. He is going to carry on from now and introduce the various speakers to you.
I wasn't able to be here last year. Heard a lot of faces here that I've seen before, and it's great to see you back again. There are a lot of people here that I haven't seen before. Can't help but think about one thing. The Lord's Prayer, it says, "Forgive us our trespasses and forgive those who trespass against us." So we have to forgive those who trespassed here and what they did. That doesn't mean we have to forget. That's one thing we should never do, is forget what took place here 5 years ago. 5 years and 51 days ago, and exactly 5 years ago today. Every one of those trees over there represent someone that died here. They were planted by number of people came down here and spent their time, including Rick Donaldson, who's been down here a number of times doing a lot of things. I look around and I see what's left, the rubble over there. See the green grass. I've been here at times when the wind was blowing so hard you should probably have a 50-pound weight in your pocket during one of the memorial services. Another time you needed water wings because it was raining so hard. Another time it was so hot you wish you had cutoffs on. But this year we're blessed. It looks like it's going to be a beautiful day and it's not going to be too awfully hot for us. I want to thank Clive for inviting me to introduce the speakers here today. When we're having a memorial service, I don't know, I just feel uneasy with MC. But as an introducer of the speakers, I'm proud to be here. I wasn't able to do everything I wanted to do during the siege, but I don't think that there were many of us that could do anything. We were stopped in our tracks. We have a few speakers today. All of them have been involved one way or another with what took place here. Written books, produced movies. We're very outspoken about everything that happened, know what happened, know whose fault it was. And I'd like to introduce the first speaker today, and that would be an author, a retired Air Force major. He wrote the book, The Waco Whitewash, Mr. Jack DeVault. Jack.
Privileged to be here to do three things. First of all, we want to honor the dead that were sacrificed here. They really were sacrificed for us. I think we also need to draw attention to the fact that there are prisoners still being held, political prisoners, and I would like to solicit your help in solving at least part of their problems. I didn't bring one of my books up here, but there are 100 of them in the trunk of the car, and I just spoke to Clive Doyle, and he agreed to this. It's a 335-page book that recounts basically the goings-on at the trial and preceding the trial of the Branch Davidians. We've managed to sell a few thousand for $16.95 and $3.95 postage when they were mail orders. Today, I've brought these books up, and if you want to contribute to the Survivors Fund, the Prisoners and Survivors Fund that Clive Doyle keeps for the Branch Davidians, all of those books are available, and all of the money will go to anyone that buys one for $10 and who is willing to write a letter to a prisoner or send birthday cards. I have here also a list of the prisoners' addresses, and I will provide those for you, and I think we have a duty to them. And I would appreciate your cooperation in that. I would like to get these books into circulation. That's one of the reasons for doing this. I've already lost the investment I made in the book, so that's not the point anymore. I've written that off. What I'd like to do is have the information of the injustice in the hands of everyone. Now, I have a few notes here for about a 3-hour speech. That's why I asked them how long I could speak. If I ad-libbed the whole thing, it would take 3 hours. if I read it, it'd take about an hour, 20 minutes. However, what I'm going to do is read to you parts of it, because that will condense it a little bit. But I'd like us to consider why we've come here. Those three things, we've mentioned only two of them. To remember those that were killed here, and to love and sympathize and support the survivors, and to remember the survivors that are in prison. And the third thing is probably what I'm going to spend the most time on, and that is to renew our determination that our government must obey the rules that it has in the Constitution. At the end of the book of Ecclesiastes, which was the wisdom of Solomon, it says, to fear God and keep his commandments, this is the whole duty of man. Those we have come to honor here today and to remember did fear God. There's no question but that they wished to keep these commandments. They gave up their possessions and lost their lives in the quest of that duty to fulfill the whole duty of man. They did not want their children to be molded by schools that were run by the survivors of Sodom and Gomorrah. Their purpose was to follow the biblical injunction to come out from among them and be ye separate. They did not seek to impose their beliefs on us or on the rest of society. Yet our president continues to impose his fictional beliefs on us. That is, that they committed suicide, that they started the fire, a great number of fictions that the government has attempted to perpetuate by the most important people in that government, Bill Clinton and Janet Reno. Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, and with all your soul, and with all your strength. He said that's the first commandment. Those who died here seem to understand that pretty well. But then Jesus said, and the second commandment is not much different, love your neighbor as yourself. The Lord Jesus Christ said that there was not much difference between loving God, the Father, the Creator of all mankind, and loving your neighbor. So that's really the first reason we're here, even though I'm not going to spend a good deal of time on it, to love our neighbors who have lost loved ones. We the people are responsible for this government that we have. Because of that, we all share its guilt. We are shamed and saddened by what happened here. But our coming here today is not to tell our government that we're ready to revolt. Our forefathers' Declaration of Independence, pronounced to King George IV, did an adequate job of that, and it still stands, and they should be reading it. We have a common bond with those who died here and with those who remain. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that we were endowed by our Creator, who, the Bible tells us, created man, us, in his own image, with certain inalienable rights, that among those rights are the God-given rights, are right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. As these innocent men and women are now in eternity and committed to the God who created them, let us give meaning to their deaths by pledging our own lives and sacred honor. Let us honor their sacrifice with our own vow that such an injustice will never again be imposed by our disobedient servant, the federal government, on any person while we have the breath to stop it. Let this pledge be our tribute to the dead we honor, and to the friends here today that we would console. Now, secondly, let us do what is left for us to do. Let us honor those who even now are suffering persecution for righteousness' sake, the prisoners whose lives have been taken from them and from their families. Let me call the roll of those who remain in prison. Renos Avram, Brad Branch, Jaime Castillo, Graham Craddock, Livingston Fagan, Paul Fatta, and Kevin Whitecliffe. On August 4th last year, the federal court in Waco, Texas, right here, presided over by Judge Walter S. Smith, Jr., who was also the judge at the San Antonio trial in 1995, proved himself to be a master, correction, that was 1994, proved himself to be a master of the whitewash, and prosecutor William Johnston continued his crusade against the Branch Davidian prisoners. On that day, U.S. Marshals swarmed all over the courthouse, and a number of attorneys and federal agents were here. How many of you were at that hearing? Anybody here? It was very interesting. The federal agent guests were invited in first, and they filled all the best seats, and then those of us who were alive and remained were allowed to come in just before the proceedings started. William Johnston, who was the lead prosecutor in the trial, then made some pronouncements. He had some findings that were not found by the jury. The jury in San Antonio didn't find a number of the things that he asserted were the truth. The prisoners at this hearing were Renos Avram, Brad Branch, Jaime Castillo, and Graham Craddock, and Kevin Whitecliffe. They were shackled. They were in the courtroom, shackled with one wrist chained to their waists, and they were bound with leg irons. They were attired in khaki-colored pajama bottoms of prisoners and in their t-shirts. All of them appeared to have aged more than the 3 years since I had last seen them. Kevin Whitecliffe had written to me that he was growing fat and flabby from working in the kitchen. On that day, he seemed reasonably trim and thin and healthy. The Branch Davidian appeals team was made up mostly of the same attorneys who had represented them since before San Antonio trial. One new lawyer was Stephen Holbrook from South Carolina, who represented Brad Branch. The hearing commenced promptly at 9 a.m. with a short statement by William Johnston. He alleged that the defendants all used enhanced weapons of some sort, and that the sentence originally imposed should be upheld. That was not a jury finding. Each of the defense attorneys rose in turn and asked that his client's sentence be reduced to 5 years. That was pretty much standard. The primary arguments in each case were that no evidence had been introduced that proved that their particular man had been involved in a crime of which they were committed with any enhanced weapon or explosive device. Furthermore, count 3 of the indictment and instructions to the jury did not have the instruction which required the finding of conspiracy. Hence, the jury did not find any conspiracy. Only count 1, the murder count of the jury instructions, allowed for a finding of conspiracy. And since no conspiracy was found there, the defendants were not found guilty on that count, and there was consequently no conspiracy found by the jury. The judge, however, found that by a preponderance of the evidence. Now, you know what this preponderance of the evidence is? That's what he thinks. This is what he judged to be the truth. The jury didn't make these findings at all. He said that the preponderance of the evidence had been that there was a conspiracy, and that each of the prisoners should be resentenced to the very same sentence which he had originally given them. Now, there was an interesting portion to this, and that was the allocution portion. That's where the prisoners get to respond and say to the judge what's on their mind. This provided a few fireworks and a little food for thought as Brad Branch, Kevin Whitecliffe, and Jaime Castillo chose not to attempt any allocution. But Graham Craddock was by far the most peaceful, pacific, laid-back person you ever saw. And he wanted simply to correct the evidence that had been misused against him, which was absolutely patently untrue. And he spent a good time trying to convince the judge that they had bad evidence against him. When Craddock finished, it was Renus Avram's turn for allocution, and Renus was not intimidated by the judge. He spoke for about 15 minutes, repeatedly accusing Judge Smith of acting on his personal feelings and just simply ignoring the law. He said, this nation is supposed to run under laws, not personal feelings. When you ignore the law, you sow the seeds of terrorism. Why wasn't the law applied? Because you didn't want to apply it. You are busy protecting this government by tiptoeing around the law. You apply it only when it works for you, and you ignore it when it works for us. Those are pretty strong words. His soliloquy was finally interrupted by his attorney, who stepped up and thought he would offend the court. But he had clearly made the judge uneasy. The judge kept fiddling with a ballpoint pen, turning it around and around in his hand. And immediately after Avram sat down, Prosecutor William Johnston rose and was outraged at the very idea that Avram had suggested that terrorism might be caused by the government's injustice. After a couple of hours of this proceeding, why the court was recessed and the judge reaffirmed his original sentence, everybody went back to exactly the sentence that had been originally given a couple of years, 3 years before in San Antonio. I would like to take now just a few minutes to examine the pack of lies that has been perpetuated by our government, fed to this nation by its leaders. How many of you were here 2 years after, 3 years ago, in November, rather in April 19th, 1995, when we met over there and everybody was, it was a little bit of mist. We were worried. We were hearing Ron had mentioned, as a matter of fact, that somebody had reported on the radio that there'd been an explosion in Oklahoma City. You remember that? That was a very tense time for all of us, I think. Well, I want to take us back to that general era, and you may not have watched 60 Minutes on the following Sunday, but on April 22nd of 1995, following that tragic bombing in Oklahoma City, Leslie Stahl questioned President Bill Clinton on CBS's 60 Minutes. The following exchange took place. Now, this is a transcript. I have the videotape of the 60 Minutes program, and I transcribed it, and this is verbatim what was said. Leslie Stahl says, Mr. President, what I keep hearing from the militiamen there, and I gather this is true among all these so-called patriots, is the Waco incident. It seems to be their battle cry. It's their cause. They say that the feds went into a religious compound to take people's guns away. They say no federal officer was ever punished. No one was ever brought to trial. I'm just wondering if you have any second thoughts about the way that raid was carried out. Bill Clinton clears his throat and says, let me remind you what happened at Waco. I'm not going to try that. Let me remind you what happened at Waco. And before the raid was carried out, those people murdered a bunch of innocent law enforcement officials who worked for the federal government. Before there was any raid, there were dead federal law enforcement officials on the ground. And when that raid occurred, it was the people who ran their cult compound at Waco who murdered their own children, not the federal officials. They made the decision to destroy all those children that were there. I think that to make those people heroes after what they did killing our innocent federal officials and then killing their own children is evidence of what is wrong. He goes on and says, people should not be able to violate the law and then say that if the federal law enforcement officials come on my land to arrest me for violating the law or because I'm suspected of a crime, I have a right to kill them and then turn around and kill the people who live there. I cannot believe that any serious patriotic American believes that the conduct of these people in Waco justifies the kind of outrageous behavior we've seen here at Oklahoma City, or the kind of inflammatory rhetoric that you're hearing today, that we've been hearing all across this country today. It's wrong. Now that is our president setting the attitude. Their president. All right. On the very next Sunday, on April 30th, 1995, 1 week after the president's lies, Attorney General Janet Reno was Tim Russert's guest on NBC's Meet the Press. She repeated the same old lies and deceptions as follows. 5 minutes? Okay. Running out of time and space here. Russert says, let me talk about some of the rhetoric that has been used over the last couple of months about your agency. The head of the NRA, Wayne LaPierre, who will be our guest later in the program, has said the following. You can see it when the jackbooted government thugs wearing black, armed to the teeth, break down the door, open fire with an automatic weapon, and kill or maim law-abiding citizens. In Clinton's administration, if you have a badge, you have the government's go-ahead to harass, intimidate, even murder law-abiding citizens. What is your reaction? Tim Russert said. Reno says, I think the best reaction is to say, give us the specifics. Let us look at it, because what we want to do is make sure that law enforcement holds people accountable when they commit a crime, when they have engaged in violent acts. But we want to do so according to the Constitution. My time is running out, and I've still got 2 hours and 40 minutes worth of speech here for you. But I just want to say that we have a responsibility. We can't just come here and say, we're sorry it happened. We have to find some way, somehow, to say that this cannot happen again. And that may involve talking to our congressman. I have a big section in here that I'd like to tell you about. That I went up to Washington for the congressional hearings on this matter, and it was revolting. The results were that they found that a great number of errors were made, and nobody was ever held accountable for those mistakes. And we have to hold our congressmen's feet to the fire. If we are the government, and we are, and they are our representatives, and they haven't been, then we've got to get after them. We've got to make sure that they do what's right. Now, I hope that I've got a bunch of volunteers. I'll go get those books and get them in Clive's hand, and he's going to sell them, and every cent that you pay for them is going to go towards the Prisoners and Survivors Fund for the Branch Davidians. And I thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Jack. Great job. Our next speaker is the President of the Provincial Government of Texas, Jesse Enlow.
Good morning. Unlike the last speaker, who was prepared to speak for quite some time, I came not prepared to speak at all. But I do have a few words that I'd like to say. First of all, I am the President of the Provisional Government of the Republic of Texas. The Republic of Texas The group that exists today to proclaim Texas as a sovereign nation did not exist when this tragedy occurred. Our provisional government came into being in December of 1995. The reason for this provisional government and the people working to reclaim Texas as the sovereign nation that it lawfully is because of the very type of abuse and unlawful action by government agents that occurred here. We have been called anti-government. We are not anti-government, which is evidenced by the fact that we elected a provisional government. We are against unlawful actions of government officials. We believe in the common law, not the thousands and thousands upon thousands of statute law that men promulgate. God set forth His law when He created this place, and He put it in our hearts. We believe that's called the common law. Murder is against the law in common law and statutory law. In 1933, President Roosevelt started creating administrative agencies. In 1946, when the federal government passed the Administrative Procedures Act, in a House report for Congress, it was stated that President Roosevelt himself had called the creation of administrative agencies the creation of a fourth branch of government not sanctioned by the Constitution. If you wonder why the government does not operate by the Constitution, it's because they are operating through administrative agencies. We do not have a lawful de jure government for the United States of America or for Texas. What happened here in Waco never should have happened. I remember where I was that day 5 years ago. I was sitting in my living room watching TV, watching the tanks destroy the building. And when we saw the first signs of smoke, I'll never forget the first thought that went through my head. My God, they're going to kill them with fire. A lot of people say that there's a controversy over who started the fire. There might be a 1/100% chance that it was accidental, but I'm quite certain that these people did not take up arms to defend themselves for 51 days only to turn around and kill themselves. And I think anybody with half a brain could come to that conclusion. Why would they start out defending themselves only to turn around and kill themselves? It just doesn't even make sense. We hope that we are successful in our efforts to prove to all Texans and to everybody in the world that as far back as 1836, 1845, and 1861, when the major events of the status of the Republic of Texas were determined, were perpetrated by fraud by the United States upon the people of Texas. And Texas is not lawfully part of that de facto unlawful government. The reason we want to do this is so that situations like what happened here will not happen again. We want a government that will do what the people tell it to do, only with the authority that the people delegate. I was asked the other day, where does the common law court get its authority? And my answer was simply that the principle that all political power is inherent in the people has been established since the days of the Magna Carta, if not before. It is stated in the Declaration of Independence for the United States of America. It's stated in the Republic of Texas Constitution for 1836. It's stated in every state constitution that's been written since then, and there's been several. And it's still in the state of Texas Constitution today. The people create the government through a document called a Constitution. Through that document, they define what the government is supposed to be.
They place limits on what the government can do, but delegate it to certain authorities. I submit to you that people cannot delegate authority that they do not have. They must have the authority before they can delegate it. The government may not redelegate their authority through administrative agencies. So when the people delegate authority, that doesn't mean they give up their authority. That means they're only allowing somebody to do something for them. They can still do it for themselves as they choose. The people have the authority. All we need to do is get enough people to stand up and exercise that authority and restore justice in Texas and in the United States of America. Thank you.
Common law grand jury.
I always forget something when I'm not prepared. In case y'all are not aware of it, the Counsel General of the Provisional Government of the Republic of Texas is putting forth his efforts to form a citizens grand jury panel. Now, this is not limited to those who have declared citizenship in the Republic of Texas. This is for anybody that lives on the soil of Texas that is concerned with justice and truth. Since the courts and the de facto government is not doing an investigation to bring out the real truth and punish those people that are responsible for what happened here, we feel that it's time for the people to exercise their authority and act. I believe our Counsel General is here. Lloyd Black? Yeah, this gentleman standing right over here with the cap on. Anybody that's interested in participating, either as a witness or as a grand juror in this effort, talk to that gentleman right over there. Thank you.
Thank you, Jesse. Our next speaker is a lady that's got a lot of guts. She was the chairperson of the jury in the criminal trial in San Antonio. Following that trial and seeing what the judge did, she wrote letters, she protested. She's just one heck of a lady. Her name is Sarah Bain. Sarah?
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. As Ron introduced, I had the honor of being the foreperson of the trial that took place in San Antonio. That was, needless to say, an extremely powerful moment, days, weeks for me. I still don't have the trial itself out of my system. There has been so much that's transpired since that trial, evidence that's been made public that was not available at the trial. I've had my views altered as a result of that information that has now been made public. But going back strictly to the 40 days at the trial, I'd like to give you some of the thoughts of the jury at that time. As we were deliberating, one of the bits of information that was vitally important to us was whether or not the helicopters that were notoriously circling overhead did any firing. In the course of the trial, we had testimony from pilots. We had testimony from some of those that were on board the helicopters. We had even military personnel who said that all of them saying, absolutely not. There were no guns on those helicopters. We did have testimony at the trial, specifically from Jack Zimmerman, who was an attorney from Houston that came in during the 51-day siege as a representative of Mr. Schneider, who testified that when he came into the Mount Carmel Center, that it was very obvious that there were bullet holes that came through the roof and he went into great detail explaining how you could recognize an incoming shell. Sadly, we had his testimony versus the testimony of many others, utilizing more or less what was the preponderance of the evidence. It was our opinion at the time that apparently the helicopters had not done any firing. Most of you are aware now that there is much evidence that supports the truth that the helicopters did fire. This is important, vitally important, to help establish whether or not the Branch Davidians that were housed at the time of the raid at Mount Carmel, whether or not they were in a defensive mode, or as the government would lead us to believe, that they were on the offensive. With the helicopters firing, actually that truth has come out from one of the ATF negotiators in the many hours of negotiation tapes during a conversation with David Koresh, who covered the truth by utilizing the statement, there were no mounted guns on the helicopters. As a jury, it didn't matter to us whether or not there were mounted guns on the helicopters. We pretty much assumed that that would not have been the case. We would have been in total violation of utilizing military weapons against citizenry had that been the case. Our main concern was whether or not those on board had done any firing. When he, in essence, said there may have been firing from the helicopters, just not by mounted guns, when I first heard that section of the negotiation tape, which was here last year in Mr. McNulty's video documentary, Waco Rules of Engagement, when I first heard that, my stomach really churned. As I've mentioned, that had been one of the real sticking points during our deliberations. Once the trial was over, we were in our deliberations. Once we had determined our verdicts, we turned them in to the judge at approximately 10:30 in the morning. We had an hour and a half wait until 1 o'clock, or 2.5 hour wait until 1 o'clock when the verdict was going to be read publicly. During that time, we jurors were basically sitting discussing the trial and continuing to try to start calming down a little bit after we had finished with our duty. And many of us sat back, those of us who felt rather upset about the fact that we had really felt it necessary to come down with any guilty verdicts at all. We sat back and said, well, the Branch Davidians have now been held accountable for the deaths of the 4 ATF agents. We can rest assured that the ATF will have someday to be made accountable for the deaths of the 6 Branch Davidians who died on that exact same day. We took some consolation in that. We're still waiting. Therein is some of the major frustration, is the fact that there has been no accountability on the part of the government. It matters not to me whether there is a trial and every single person is exonerated. I just simply feel that there needs to be a trial. They need to be made to answer for the reasons why they had to conduct the raid, and it needs to be in a public forum, not personnel matters that are handled behind the scenes. And I believe that for the peace of mind of many Americans, that might help bring a little bit of closure to the incidents that took place on February 28th and April 19th of '93. Of course, in addition to having a trial for the ATF officers and their responsibility for the deaths of 6 Branch Davidians, there has to be some accountability made by the FBI for their activities on April the 19th, actually for their activities during the entire 51 days, but specifically for their activities on the 19th. Why did they feel that it was necessary at that time to insert CS gas? Why did they determine at that time that the insertion of CS gas had to be done by tanks? Why during that time did they allow the FBI tactical team to overshadow the FBI negotiators who seemed behind the scenes to be really wanting to bring a peaceful end to the entire siege. Some way, the FBI tactical squad got the upper hand, and we all know the result of that. If there is anything that I would ask that those of you who are present, especially those of you who are from out of Texas, would carry back to your area, is to remind everyone who still considers the Branch Davidians to be murderers. They were found not guilty of the count of murder. They were found not guilty on the count of conspiracy to commit murder. That was done by a jury of 12 after over 40 days of listening to evidence in trial. Some that had, if it had been valid, if we had considered the evidence valid, would have indeed said they were murderers. The government did not prove that at all. Those were two of the easier counts that we had to make our determinations on. Because of our determinations on the not guilty for murder or for conspiracy to commit murder, the jury then turns around and makes what I still consider to be our fatal flaw. The third count we kind of abbreviatedly called the firearms charge. Jack DeVault alluded to that. To be found guilty of the firearms charge, we had to have found that the Branch Davidians possessed or used firearms. It was hard to say that they did not use or possess firearms. Where we as a jury made our fatal flaw was in not paying close attention to the instructions that were in front of us in black and white, that they had to have been found guilty of utilizing the weapons during the commission of a crime. That's where we put our period. We had already found several of the defendants guilty of manslaughter. I'd like to address that in a moment. We believe that they had been utilizing weapons during the commission of the crime of manslaughter. Where the court had put its period was a little bit farther down the instructions that said that they had to have been found guilty of the crime of murder. We had already exonerated them from that charge, finding them guilty on count 3. Thank you very much, jury. Now has many of the Branch Davidians in prison for 30 years. I have a big burden on my shoulders because of that. Back to the count of manslaughter. Because of the instructions that we received, the definition of manslaughter carries with it the idea that someone acted as a rational person would have acted when they are under a siege of provocation. We consider the Branch Davidians to have acted logically. They certainly were under a siege of provocation. Because of that, they were found guilty of, as everyone has termed it, the lesser charge of manslaughter. What we are again waiting for is for the provocateurs to still have to answer for their charge. We're waiting for the accountability that our very guilty verdict, the very verdict that we came down with on the count 3, or on the manslaughter charge, said took place. That there was provocation. Why is the government not being caused to answer for that provocation? Because of my frustration, because of the burden that I do feel, I also do not know exactly what the proper tactic is to cause such a accountability to occur. I'm hoping that someone has more leadership ability than I do, has better ideas of the workings of the government, has better ideas of the workings of our court system, and can pull something together to see that eventually the accountability is brought to bear. In mentioning that with a gentleman that I met just this morning, he said he just did not see how that would happen. The Indians are still waiting. I said that was not. I mentioned that was not very encouraging. I feel that this is my 5th year to come out to Mount Carmel. I'm hoping that it will not be another 5 years that I still am feeling this burden and this frustration. I'm hoping that there will soon, not later, be this accountability that we're all waiting for. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sarah. Appreciate that. Our next speaker, and we're going to ask that we try and keep these down to about 5 or 10 minutes. Our next speaker is Archie Lowe, a patriot and a Patriot American. Archie.
Presidente.
First, I would like to thank Clive Doyle, and God bless you, brother. I would like to say that what America needs to do is rediscover those ancient boundaries. The Bible talks about rediscovering those ancient markers, God's law. What have we let slip out of our fingers? What have we done by being apathetic? Have we accomplished in the last several years, the last decade, the last 20 years? What have we done? We sit at home and we've watched our televisions, enjoyed our sports, we've enjoyed our credit cards, we've shopped the specials at Walmart, we've lived a good life, haven't we? And look what it's gotten us. Let's go back and rediscover those ancient boundaries, those ancient markers. What did the people that started the United States, what did they have to say? With a firm reliance on the protection of the divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. It doesn't say anything about watching television or shopping at Walmart. These men were dedicated to death. Read the names. Read the names. Patrick Henry, Nathan Hale, Samuel Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, on and on and on. Men of renown, like David's mighty men, they went out and did something. They put feet to their ideas, their desires, their knowledge of God's Word and His law. The Declaration of Independence also states, whenever any form of government becomes destructive to those inalienable God-given rights, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and institute new government. In Texas, Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution says political power is inherent in the people, and they have the inalienable right to change, alter, or abolish their form of government in any manner they may deem expedient. That is the word. That is the law. Winston Churchill stated, if you will not fight for the right when you can easily win without bloodshed, if you will not fight when your victory will be sure and not so costly, you may come to the moment when you will have to fight when all the odds against you are against you and only a precarious chance of survival exists. There may be a worse case. You may have to fight when there is no chance of victory. It is better to perish than to live as slaves. I would encourage you to get off your comfortable couches. Get away from the television that bends your mind and informs your opinions. All these so-called surveys that are forming a public opinion right now. Know and understand that how unlawful it is for a president of the United States to issue executive orders. He makes law by opening his mouth. I thought that was the prerogative of Boris Yeltsin, Fidel Castro, Manuel Noriega, or a multitude of other dictators that make law by dictating. That's what that is. When you actually create
law by opening your mouth with an executive session. I'll leave you with one more quote from a fellow named Samuel Adams. And I want you to know, I'm saying this to myself as much as I am saying it to you. But take this and plant seed with it. Let it grow. We need a crop. If you love wealth greater than liberty, the tranquility of servitude greater than the animating contest of freedom, then go home from us in peace. We seek not your counsels, nor your arms. May your chains sit lightly upon you. Crouch down and lick the hand that feeds you, and may posterity forget that you were our countrymen. I didn't say that, Samuel Adams said it. But where are we in the world today? Take to heart what I'm saying. It's not my words, it's something greater than myself. I'm not this kind of guy. I live out on a farm and I would prefer to live out there, tend my animals, grow my crops. But God's judgments will be poured out on a rebellious people. We have been given opportunity after opportunity to repent, but we have refused. May God have mercy on a selfish, uncooperative, unwilling, unrepentant people. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Thank you.
Thanks, Archie. Our next speaker is from the 3rd Congressional Congress. His name is William Haynes. Mr. Haynes.
From the 3rd Continental Congress. If you know your history, the 1st Continental Congress was convened back in the 1700s to try to determine what to do with an overbearing British government. The second one was when they decided that they had to fight to get a freedom. When I walked out here this morning, I'd watched all the videos. I'd seen this stuff. I'd read the magazine articles. I've watched this. I watched it happen on TV. But it didn't hit me till I walked out here, how real this is. This wasn't just a few people dying, or actually it was more than a few. It was, 82, I guess, overall. It was a whole nation that died here. When the servants turn on the masters, what have you got? They used to call themselves civil servants. They don't anymore. Now they're federal employees. They don't consider themselves serving us at all. When that happens, they've got to be reined in. This is why the 3CC, the 3rd Continental Congress, formed. We have tried, we have petitioned the government, we have petitioned every senator, every congressman, their lawyers, with a new petition for redress of grievances as allowed in the First Amendment of the Constitution. We didn't get one reply. Not by phone, not by fax, not by email. They all received it. We have documentation that they received it, and they ignore it. They will not correct themselves. We formed to see that nothing like this ever happens again. We can't allow these people to have died in vain. Their death was really a wake-up call to the nation. I was asleep. I watching it and saying, this is going on. But when that fire started, there was something else happened. And there have been millions of people, millions of our citizens across the nation that woke up because of this. When any government will send 100 armed, essentially military men, that was an army, to arrest one man on effectively minor charges, that's wrong. They not only endangered every adult there, but they willfully endangered the children. They knew there were children there.
That's right.
Any government that would do that is no longer a legitimate government. They gave up their right. In Janet Reno's effort to serve her master, Satan, God turned that around to make it His will. He is raising this movement. He is raising the people. He is raising the army. Satan may have then be responsible for the fire and the deaths, but something greater has come out of it. The Waco massacre, just like the Boston massacre 223 years before, has really served to galvanize this nation. We have a focus. History repeats itself. Just like the old saying goes, those who don't learn from history are bound to repeat it. We didn't learn. We're repeating history. The time really is getting close at hand where everybody's going to have to declare themselves. Are they an American or are they a tyrannist? Unfortunately, too many of the people whose salary we pay are tyrannists. They're not Americans anymore. They gave up that right. Any one of them who isn't part of the solution, any person who isn't part of the solution is by definition part of the problem. Don't be part of the problem anymore. We all know, especially us in the Third Continental Congress, we talked about it the very first time we met, and we're representatives, delegates from all the states of the nation. We know that we have painted a big target on ourselves, but somebody has to be out there. I know that someday they're going to come after me. My only hope is that I can show as much courage as the smallest child did. I would like to say to Janet Reno, Bill Clinton, all the ATF and all the FBI agents, the old line, as you sow, so shall you reap. And there's been so much fertilizer poured on, it's going to be one hell of a harvest. We in the Patriot community rose out of the ashes of Waco. We've been demonized. The current phraseology is that we're called anti-government criminal extremists. That's the current thing you can watch for. Of course, we all know that's just another lie. We aren't anti-government, as has been said before. We're anti-corrupt government.
Yeah.
How can it be considered criminal to want to remove the subordinates from office who have turned against their masters, us? The only thing extreme about us is our love of country and our love of the Constitution. The current administrators of our government, they aren't our government, we are the government. They are just the administrators of our government. From the federal level on down, with just a very few exceptions, openly violate their oaths of office. They openly violate the laws of our nation, and they must be stopped. We must reinstitute lawful, restrained government. The Constitution was the only document in history ever written to restrain a government, and they've totally trashed it. They've totally set it aside, but that's what we're hoping to reestablish through the Third Continental Congress. There are no laws, there's no lawful basis for federal police. If you notice the ATF, it says ATF police. FBI is FBI police. There is no lawful basis for a federal police. There's no lawful basis for senators and congressmen to relinquish their authority to unelected bureaucrats. There's no authority for judges to overturn jury decisions. Once a jury is seated, the judge is just an arbitrator. He has no say. The jury is the supreme in that court. But they do it all the time, and they get away with it because nobody stands up to them. There's no laws that allow judges to legislate from the bench, or for presidents to make decrees. No laws that allow bureaucrats to write policy that affects every one of us as if it was law. There's no law that allows the police to confiscate anything they want that they can sell for their own benefit and not even charge people, but they're doing it all across the nation. Federal troops were used here, used military equipment, totally against the law, to kill the men, women, and children for no real reason, if you think about it, other than to prove that they could do it, that they could get away with it. We must not let the people who died here be forgotten. We must use their faith, their strength, and their resolve to strengthen all of us to make sure that this never happens again. Thank you.